The moment my son called me captain at the dinner table, I felt my stomach drop. He hadn't called me that since he was 9 years old. I remember exactly when it started. We'd gone through a rough patch after the divorce. His mother and I split when he was 7, and the arrangement was what it was. Every other weekend, Wednesday nights, holidays split down the middle with a precision that felt more like a legal document than a family. He was quiet for a long time after. Stopped calling me dad for almost a year. Just hey when I picked him up, one-word answers in the car on the way to get pizza or catch a movie. Then one Saturday afternoon I took him to see a movie about a Coast Guard rescue operation. He sat through the whole thing with his eyes wide open, barely touched his popcorn. On the drive home, he looked over at me from the passenger seat and said, out of nowhere, "You'd be a good captain." I laughed. I told him I got seasick on fishing boats. He grinned, the first real grin I'd seen from him in months, and said, "You're still my captain." After that, it became his word for when something was serious, when he needed me to really listen. He used it twice before that dinner, once when he was 12 and got into a fight at school and didn't want his mother to find out, once when he was 17 and needed to tell me he'd been drinking at a party and needed a ride home, no questions asked. Both times I understood immediately. Both times I showed up. He's 28 now. He works in data analytics for a mid-sized logistics company outside of Columbus. Good job. Stable. He's the kind of person who reads the terms and conditions before signing anything, who keeps a spreadsheet for his monthly budget, who calls me every Sunday around 6 o'clock. I know his voice in every version of itself. I know when he's tired, when he's distracted, when something's sitting on him that he hasn't figured out how to say yet. That Sunday in March when he drove up from Columbus to have dinner with me, I noticed something was off before we even walked through the door. He hugged me too long, just a half second too long, but I felt it. We sat down to eat. I'd made chili, his request. We talked about work, talked about a road trip he was thinking about taking in the summer. He ate. He laughed at the right moments, but his eyes kept moving to somewhere just past my shoulder, like he was running calculations I couldn't see. Then he set down his spoon, looked directly at me and said, "Captain, I need to tell you something." I put my own spoon down. "Okay," I said, "talk." He'd met someone at a professional development conference in Chicago back in January, not romantically. A guy, late 30s, well-dressed, came across as sharp and easy to be around. His name was Thad. He'd introduced himself as a private equity advisor focused on emerging market infrastructure, said he'd been in the industry for 12 years, had clients in 7 states, was selectively expanding his portfolio and had been specifically looking for professionals in data and logistics because of their analytical edge. My son told me he thought it was a sales pitch at first, but Thad hadn't pitched him anything that night. They just talked about the logistics industry, about data trends, about where freight was going in the next decade. Thad was knowledgeable, not in a rehearsed way. He asked good questions. He laughed at the right things. They'd exchanged cards. My son thought that was the end of it. But Thad had followed up 3 days later. Just a short email, said he'd enjoyed the conversation, attached an article about autonomous freight networks, thought it might be relevant to my son's work. No ask, no pitch. My son wrote back. They started a loose email thread, occasional, over about 6 weeks. Then Thad suggested a call. On the call, Thad mentioned he was working with a small group of professionals, all in data-adjacent fields, who were participating in a private infrastructure fund focused on rural broadband expansion. He explained that federal funding through recent infrastructure legislation had created opportunities for private co-investment at favorable terms. He said the fund had already done 2 successful rounds and was quietly opening a third to a limited number of investors. He thought my son might be a good fit. I was listening to all of this and keeping my face completely neutral. My son knew I was listening. He kept his eyes on the table. Did he send you anything in writing? I asked. Yes, a prospectus. It looked real. Logos, legal language, a registered address in Cincinnati. Did you look up the address? He paused. I looked it up on the fund's own website. I nodded slowly, not on a separate source. No. Okay, what's the fund called? Bridgeway Rural Capital Partners. And what did he ask you to do? My son took a breath. He said the minimum investment for the third round was $22,000. He said I could structure it as a personal investment through a wire transfer to a holding account or roll it in through my LLC. I set one up last year for some freelance consulting. He said the LLC route would give me better tax treatment. I kept my voice even. Has he asked you to transfer anything yet? He sent wire instructions 2 days ago. Have you responded? No. That's when I called and asked if I could come up for dinner. I leaned back in my chair. The chili was going cold. Outside a car drove by, and then it was quiet again. Walk me through the prospectus, I said. What's the name on the documents? There's a managing director listed, a woman named Sandra Price, registered agent in Ohio. Did Thad mention Sandra Price to you? My son thought about it. No, not once. So the person recruiting you isn't the person named on the documents. He looked up at me. That's a problem, I said. I want to explain something here because it matters for what comes next. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm 51 years old. I spent 20 years as a field supervisor for a construction management company, and I don't have a finance degree. But I grew up watching my father get taken. He was a good man and a trusting one, and when I was in my early 20s, a man he considered a friend talked him into a real estate syndication that turned out to be a shell. My father lost $40,000, money he'd saved over 15 years. I watched what that did to him, not just financially. It changed something in him, made him quieter, made him smaller, in a way I can't fully describe even now. So when my son was in his early teens, I started talking to him about this, not as lectures, just when the moment came up, when a news story was on about a Ponzi scheme, when a neighbor got scammed out of their savings by a fake contractor. I told him, the person doing the recruiting is almost never the person on the paperwork. There's always a layer between them, and when someone leads with exclusivity, I'm selectively opening this. I thought of you specifically. That's not a compliment, that's a technique. I told him, if you're ever in a situation where something feels wrong but you can't say it out loud, say Captain, that's all. Just say the word and I'll know. He remembered. I asked him to pull up the prospectus on his phone. He slid it across the table. The document was polished. 12 pages, professional layout, the kind you can get from a template service for about $40. I looked at the registered agent address, a street in Cincinnati. I typed it into Google Maps. It was a UPS store. This is a mail drop, I said. My son leaned over and looked at the screen. I watched his face. The fund website, I said. Pull it up. He did. Clean design. A few stock photos of rural landscapes, a map of the Midwest with highlighted counties, language about federal co-investment and broadband infrastructure, an about page with Sandra Price's photo, which, I noticed, was a professional headshot of the type you can license for commercial use. I searched Sandra Price's name along with the fund name. Nothing. No LinkedIn. No mention in any Ohio business registry filing. I searched Bridgeway Rural Capital Partners in the Ohio Secretary of State database. No result. It doesn't exist, I said. My son was quiet for a moment. Then, Thad does. I met him in person. He gave me a real business card. A business card is $4 for 200 at any office supply store, I said. I'm not saying Thad doesn't exist. I'm saying this fund doesn't, and the person whose name is on these documents doesn't appear to be a real person, or at least not someone connected to a real registered entity. I asked him if he'd given Thad any personal financial information. He said he'd mentioned, casually, in conversation, that he'd had a good year and was sitting on some liquid savings he'd been thinking about deploying. Thad had listened, asked a few thoughtful follow-up questions, and moved on without making it a big deal. That wasn't casual, that was recon. He knew you had money before he ever sent you the prospectus, I said. My son put his phone down on the table. He stared at it. I'm not an idiot, he said, not defensively, just quietly. I know that, I said. That's not what this is. These people are good. That's their job. They're not grabbing wallets on the street. They spend weeks building trust before they ever make an ask. By the time the number comes up, you feel like you're already in a relationship with someone you respect. He nodded. He picked up his spoon and looked at the chili and set it back down. What do I do? He asked. First, don't respond to the wire instructions. Don't send anything. Don't ask for more time. Don't say you're thinking about it. Just go quiet. Won't that tip him off? He's probably running this with multiple people at once. Going quiet is the least alarming thing you can do. If he follows up, you can say you've had a family situation come up and you need to put investments on hold for now. Keep it vague. Don't give him anything to argue against. And then you report it. You file a complaint with the SEC's online portal. It takes about 15 minutes. You file with the Ohio Division of Securities. You file with the FTC. Give them Thad's name, his email address, his phone number, the fund name, the wire instructions, all of it. You're probably not the only person he's approached. The more detail these agencies have, the better. My son looked at me. Will anything happen? I told him the truth. Maybe not quickly, maybe not in a way you'll ever see. But it goes into a database, and if this guy is doing this in multiple states, which he almost certainly is, enough reports can trigger a federal investigation. Your report might be the one that connects two others. He nodded. I want to show you one more thing, I said. I asked him to forward me the email with the wire instructions. He did. I looked at the receiving bank, a small credit union in Kentucky I'd never heard of. Wire instructions for an investment fund will almost always route to a major custodian, Schwab, Fidelity, Pershing, TD Ameritrade. A credit union in Kentucky is not where a private equity fund receiving institutional-level investments parks money. It's where money goes to disappear. If you'd sent that wire, I said, the money would have been gone within 24 hours. Probably moved through 2 or 3 accounts and then converted. He was quiet for a long moment. I came close, he said. I had the wire form half filled out on Tuesday night. Something felt off and I couldn't name it. You named it, I said. At dinner, that's exactly what you named it. He looked at me across the table. I forgot I was going to tell you something, he said. In the car driving up, I was going to lead with work stuff and ease into it. But then I sat down and you looked at me and I just said it. The word. Yeah. I didn't say anything for a second. I just looked at him. This person I'd watched grow from a quiet 7-year-old in the passenger seat of my car to someone who kept a budget spreadsheet and called his dad every Sunday. Someone who had, at some point in the last 20 years, internalized enough of what I'd tried to pass on to stop himself at the edge of something bad. You did the right thing, I said. He half smiled. I know. We finished dinner. He helped me wash the bowls. We watched the second half of a game neither of us particularly cared about, and he fell asleep on the couch around 9:30 the way he used to when he was a kid, one arm over his face, completely out. In the morning I made coffee and he sat at the kitchen table going through the SEC complaint form on his laptop. I sat across from him and read the paper the way I used to when he was in high school doing homework at this same table. He filed 3 separate complaints before he left. He took screenshots of everything first. Every email, the wire instructions, the prospectus, the fund website, the business card. 2 weeks later he called me on a Sunday, same as always. He said Thad had sent one follow-up email, then gone quiet. He'd heard nothing since. Good, I said. Do you think he moved on to someone else? My son asked. Probably, I said, which is why the reports matter. You're not the only one he's talking to. There was a pause. I could hear traffic in the background on his end. He was probably walking somewhere. Hey, Captain, he said. Yeah. Thanks. I told him he didn't have to thank me. He said he knew. We talked for another 20 minutes about nothing in particular, the road trip he was still planning, a new restaurant in his neighborhood, whether I was going to finally repaint the deck this summer. Normal stuff. The kind of conversation that happens when the hard thing is behind you and you're both still standing. After we hung up, I sat for a while in the kitchen. I thought about my father, about the way he looked at that kitchen table in 1997 when he finally told me what had happened, the number, the name, the months he'd spent hoping it would somehow resolve itself before he had to say it out loud. He'd said he felt stupid. I told him he wasn't stupid, that these people were professionals, that it could have happened to anyone. He'd nodded, but I don't think he ever fully believed me. I think about that sometimes, about what it would have meant for him if someone had been sitting across that table. If he'd had a word to say, and someone who would have understood what it meant the moment he said it. You build what you can, you pass on what you know, you stay close enough that they don't have to figure everything out alone. That's the only investment that doesn't come with risk. I keep coming back to the moment my son set down his spoon. Not the wire instructions, not the fake address on Google Maps, not even the name Sandra Price that didn't exist in any database I could find. I keep coming back to that one small gesture, the spoon going down, his eyes coming up, and the word captain, sitting in the air between us like something he'd been holding for days. That word didn't come from nowhere. It came from years of small conversations at kitchen tables and in car rides and in the 10-minute gaps between things. It came from me telling him, when he was 13 and barely interested, about a man named Thad who didn't exist yet but already did, already existed in some form, in some city, wearing some version of a well-pressed shirt and asking the right questions at the right time. I told him what my father couldn't tell me, because my father didn't know it himself until it was too late. That's the thing about what happened. The cause and the effect are separated by 20 years. My father's loss, my anger on his behalf, my decision to pass something on, and then one Sunday night in March, the return. Actions have returns, not always clean ones, not always fast ones, but they return. What I put into those conversations came back to me in the form of my son knowing to stop at the edge of something and say a single word. He's a smart person. He reads terms and conditions. He keeps spreadsheets, but intelligence alone didn't protect him, because the person who approached him was also intelligent, maybe more practiced, certainly more deliberate. What protected him was something different. It was the ability to sit with a feeling he couldn't fully name and trust it anyway. To recognize that something was wrong even when every document looked right, every conversation had gone smoothly, every instinct toward politeness and optimism said to move forward. That kind of judgment doesn't come from a degree. It comes from being taught early and repeatedly that the world contains people whose entire skill is making you feel safe right before they take something from you. And it comes from having somewhere to bring that feeling when it arrives. A person, a word, a table with a bowl of chili going cold on it. I think about my father a lot. He was a decent and careful man who still got taken because no one had given him the vocabulary for what was happening until after it happened. He didn't have a code word. He didn't have a table to bring it to. He carried it alone for months before he said it out loud, and by then the money was long gone and what was left was mostly shame that didn't belong to him. What I tried to build with my son wasn't just knowledge, it was the nerve to use it. The willingness to say something's wrong out loud to a real person before the damage is done, even when saying it means admitting you almost fell for it. Even when the other person is your father and you're 28 years old and you've been handling your own life just fine for a decade. That takes something. It takes the kind of integrity that doesn't need an audience, the kind of clear-eyed thinking that holds up under pressure, and the kind of backbone that lets you stop mid-process and say, "Not yet, not until I understand this completely." He had all three. I like to think I had something to do with that. But honestly, he did the harder part. He picked up the phone, he drove up, he said the word. You can teach someone everything you know and still not know if it landed until the moment it matters. That Sunday, I found out it did.